Okay. So in the 9th chapter, which is on the application of the Bodhisattva vow, we've covered the first section, which is the bodhicitta of aspiration. And we're now in the second part, which is the bodhicitta of action or inaction, or bodhicitta of application. So thank you. Yes, now I'm recording. So in there, we're now looking within the bodhicitta of application, we're looking at the 6 paramitas. And here then we're presently looking at the paramita of generosity. And that's where we say there's 3 kinds of generosity. The first is material generosity. And the second is the generosity of protecting from fear. And then finally, we're looking now at the greatest form of generosity, which is the gift of Dharma, or the Dharma of the Dharma of the Dana, or the general practice of generosity, of giving the Dharma. Now you might say, well, look, people are, first of all, they're very needy, so they need material things. So what's it going to be helpful if you sort of have all this Dharma talk, you know? And that's a very valid objection. And then you might also say, well, people who are in great fear, you know, what's Dharma going to help, you know? And all of that is completely right. Of course, but the thing is, the gift of Dharma is what goes far, far further than the others. Because the others, they're immediate needs that have to do with this life. So, of course, if we just think in terms of this life, and most people in the modern world do, and hence any objection from, you could say, your average modern person, would be very difficult to refute, because for them, then the gift of Dharma wouldn't make much sense. There would just be something that had to do with spirit or morale and all of that. And they say, oh, that's very good. But, you know, Maslow's pyramid of needs, you know, first you need to have the basics. Absolutely valid. But you see, this is coming from another perspective, which is then the perspective of countless lifetimes, in which we have endlessly been wandering in situations in which we were destitute or in great fear. So that's where the gift of Dharma ultimately is the greatest gift. But we have to have a perspective that takes into account this particular perspective, that doesn't see this life as, you could say, just this one time off. So that's where, you know, it's a bit like the, you know, when we say, what is it then? If you teach a man to fish, you know, then, you know, you make sure that, you know, you give a man a meal and then he's good for a day. If you teach him to fish, he'll be good for the rest of his life, that sort of thing. So this is really about the greater perspective. So that's where the gift of Dharma is so essential. It is essentially the gift, or that which is going to disconnect or put an end to suffering altogether. So in the root text then, Omniscient Jigme Lingpa writes, the gift of Dharma is in 3 degrees, of which the actual gift is teaching in accordance with one's hearers. Such a thing is hard for those still on the path of aspiration. They should instead remove their own defilements. So that's valid concern. Before we sort of rush out and are going to tell the truth to everybody, it's probably a good idea if there is some substance in terms of our own personal practice. So Kangyur Rinpoche, he then comments, the supreme gift of Dharma is likewise subdivided into 3 degrees. The Arya Lokadara Paripricha Sutra contains the following admonition. What is meant by the gift of Dharma? The giving of pen, ink, and books is the small gift of Dharma, basically education, just providing the needs for education, or rather providing the necessities for education. Then Kangyur Rinpoche continues, to teach the Dharma of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and to teach the unsurpassable Dharma according to the capacity of the hearer, is the great gift of Dharma. So that's going a bit further. Then this is then teaching actual Yeah, actual Dharma. But again, what we would refer to as Hinayana. To bring people to the cultivation of bodhicitta and to teach a Dharma inconceivable like space is the peerless gift of Dharma. So that's the greatest kind of Dharma. That is then teaching the path to perfect liberation and enlightenment. So then, the next stanza, Jigme Lingpa says, with love and with compassion, and through reading of the scriptures, they should liberate the minds of those who tend to virtue. They should pray for them, and once their own minds have been freed, their main task is to bring about the benefit of others, according to their karmic destiny and character. So then this is then the scope of the persons that have some capacity to teach. So Kangyur Rinpoche, he comments, the true gift of Dharma is to impart instruction to others according to their mental capacity. However, it is difficult for people who are on the level of aspirational practice to give teachings in this way, since they are unable to expound the Dharma clearly, either in word or meaning. So this is where we looked at previously. What we refer to as aspirational practice is generally understood as the first two paths, the paths of aspiration and the path of the path of accumulation and the path of joining. At this stage, one should consider the altruistic attitude as the main practice and endeavor earnestly with mindfulness and vigilance in the task of clearing away defiled emotions according to the instructions of the teacher. So that's where we need first to practice. With love and compassion, one should read aloud the general teachings of the Buddha and in particular the sutras of the Mahayana. Others who hear them will purify the negative actions and obscurations of many lives. A spirit of altruism will naturally appear in them, and innumerable qualities will arise. And this also we can see in Buddhist cultures, where very often you have this practice of the monastics going out and reading scriptures in the house of lay people. For example, reading the Tripitaka, the sutras, and the various scriptures of the Tripitaka. So Yonten Gyatso, he says, there is a story that a pigeon used to listen to Vasubandhu reciting the sutras. This had the effect of purifying the karma of its previous existences. When it died, it was reborn a human being and became the master Stiramati. This is a quite well-known story. So this Vasubandhu, as you probably will know, was one of the great teachers in the Yogacarya tradition, and was a brother of a Sangha. And he was once teaching when there was this little bird, then the pigeon, that heard him teaching. And so later he was born as his student, Stiramati, became incredibly learned and traveled to Tibet and then passed away in Tibet. So he was quite important for the Tibetans. Then Kangyur Rinpoche continues, gods and nagas who are drawn to virtue will indeed come and listen to the sound of Dharma and, freed from karma and defiled emotions, will strive to protect the Buddha's teaching. In sum, it is important to pray that all beings become vessels of the Mahayana teachings and to strive to attain the unsurpassable goal. When one's mind is free, untouched by the 8 worldly concerns, and uncluttered by distraction and busyness, the main thing is to bring benefit to others. One should teach the Dharma to others according to their type, capacity, aspiration, and character, from the principles of karma and continuing through to the great perfection. So that's then in the case of someone who then has genuinely reached some degree of spiritual maturity and is not caught up in the 8 worldly dharmas, which we usually condense as simply just meaning hope and fear, hoping for certain things and then worrying about other things. So such a sage is then free from distraction, free from busyness. And their main what makes them tick is this wish simply to benefit others. Now, once that's there, then it has to be according to the audience. They'll then be aware of what is helpful to the audience and then teach according to the various dispositions and characters of the audience. And that's where then they would begin with the sutra teachings, which are the teachings on cause and effect, the Four Noble Truths, dependent arising, and then continuing through teaching emptiness according to the second turning of the wheel, and then all the way through to the teachings like the great perfection, the greater middle way, and Mahamudra, and these kind of teachings on the naked exposition of Buddha nature. So that's where we have these gradual degrees to which then individuals can teach the gift or give the gift of Dharma. Gift of Dharma, yeah. Okay, so that was the first paramita, the paramita of generosity, the giving of material goods, the giving of freedom from fear, and the giving of Dharma. The next paramita is then the paramita of discipline. So here then Jigme Lingpa writes, discipline, in essence, is to keep oneself from what is inappropriate. And this, divided threefold, means to keep from evil acts, to gather virtue, and to bring about the benefit of beings. To keep from evil means abstaining from non-virtue in one's thoughts and words and deeds. To gather virtue means the practice of the 6 perfections. Benefiting beings means to work for others' sake. So, with regards to discipline, this is an interesting word because in our culture, and especially sort of the last, I don't know, post-Second World War or whatever, discipline is sort of a little bit of a uncomfortable word. It's not generally sort of part of the vocabulary that your average sort of modern parent or teacher sort of is entirely comfortable with, because it carries these sort of slightly archaic connotations of imposition and you could say unkind, rigid parameters for behavior, right? So sort of the modern person has a little bit of an issue with discipline. And that's where Trungpa Rinpoche, he very kindly sort of clarified a bit what is meant with discipline in the Buddhist context, which is something very far from what we perhaps could refer to sort of a Victorian era approach to discipline, and rather points to discipline in a Buddhist context is simply a matter of simplification. It's just being very clear. It's this sort of the notion of it's a no-brainer. And that's where it's a no-brainer in the sense of it's just something that we abide by. Very often we sort of say, I have this choice, you know, I don't really feel like doing this, and I'll do that. And that's where once there's a clear idea of what actually is beneficial and what is harmful, then we don't really need to think of it in that sense. And that's simply just about, that's discipline. It's like our car. We have the discipline to fill it with petrol. That's discipline. And that's where we don't just drive until it sort of peters out. We make sure that there's always petrol in the tank, that we keep it oil. That's discipline. And that's simply just being aware of what are the causes and conditions. And we don't even think, do I feel like putting petrol in my car? So on. So Kangyur Rinpoche then here comments, he says, the essence of discipline is the firm decision to refrain from harming others and even from having the idea of doing so. Now remember here, we are talking about bodhicitta, so that's within the context of the paramitas. There's very much this altruistic approach to the whole entire idea of discipline. He says, it is a repudiation of all that is contrary to the precepts. The teachings on discipline are expounded under 3 headings. And this is actually, then the first 2 are certainly universal for all the various yanas. One, the avoidance of negative actions of thought, word, and deed. Two, the undertaking of positive actions such as the 6 transcendent perfections. And three, the benefiting of others, either directly through the 4 ways of attracting disciples, or indirectly through the purifications of one's own mind in order to be of help to others. So we'll look at these then in some more detail. So that's where we then first look at the first category, the discipline of avoiding negative actions. So here there's a few differences between the Hinayana and the Mahayana. And every once in a while, I'll sort of repeat something with regards to the terms Hinayana and Mahayana, because Hinayana is a Mahayana term. So when we say Hinayana, it's a Mahayana that would refer to particular views that constitute a lesser approach to enlightenment. And that's where it's seen very much as a gradual approach. And you need to begin with the Hinayana. It's the Hinayana that still believes in some degree of, you could say, external reality. And it's the Hinayana that still is mainly focused on the individual experience and the individual need for cultivating the qualities of the path and the individual need for liberation. And so we also associate this with what we call pratimoksha, or individual liberation. So that's where the Mahayana you could say present this as a step to then coming a bit further, going beyond just the belief in the external reality, and also as a step towards going beyond the need for simply individual liberation. It's very important that we don't associate this with living traditions. You know, that's where sometimes this happens, that of course there are some traditions that uphold some of the, what we then would define in the Mahayana as Hinayana doctrines, but to overall refer to some of the traditions as being Hinayana, you can be sure that these traditions will not appreciate that. I don't think you meet somebody and then you would say, oh yeah, you belong to the Hinayana tradition. Not good. And it's also then important that when we're talking about Hinayana, we don't all of a sudden start referring to the Hinayana according to, you know, giving them names of living traditions, you know, like for example, if we begin to refer to the Hinayana according to, you know, the Buddhism that you have in certain countries. So we need to distinguish between, you could say, the living Buddhist traditions and the doctrinal classifications. And Hinayana is a doctrinal classification. So here then, Jigme Lingpa, he writes, Omniscient Jigme Lingpa, he writes, Omniscient Jigme Lingpa writes, the discipline of bodhisattvas is more eminent than pratimoksha, individual liberation. And this is thanks to 4 distinctive elements. Through pratimoksha, one refrains from harming others and the wish to do so. The bodhisattvas do likewise, but add to this, they help, the help they give to others. The things to be abandoned in the pratimoksha are summarized as 7 negativities, the stress being laid on body and on speech, while bodhisattvas emphasize and shun all 10. So again here, the bodhisattvas, they share with the Hinayana the abandoning of negative actions and the embracing of positive actions. But then they add to that the benefiting others. In addition to that, then they while everybody practices the 10 virtues, abandoning the 10 non-virtues, which are the 3 of speech, the 3 of body, the 4 of speech, and the 3 of mind, then in the Hinayana, there's mainly emphasis on the first 7, which are the 3 of body and the 3 of speech. The Mahayana, they very much emphasize particularly the last 3, and as such then embrace all 10 really. We'll see how this actually plays out then. And Kangyur Rinpoche comments, generally speaking, Those who enter the lower or higher vehicles are the same in striving to avoid negativities and embrace virtue. The discipline of the Bodhisattvas, however, is distinguished by 4 special features, which place it on a level superior to that of Pratimoksha discipline of the Hinayana. You know, when I was doing my homework here, I was trying to identify these 4. It might dawn on us. I read through it a few times, but you might have to help me here. Because actually, yes, we just saw there was 2 ways, right, in which there is some superiority of the Mahayana. But I just couldn't find the 4. So you're going to have to, maybe you can help me here. So anyway, we're clear on that there is some superiority on the Mahayana. But exactly what the 4 are, I'm sort of still struggling a bit to find out. So forgive me for my how do you say, lack of certainty on the topic here. So it says here, in the Pratimoksha, one avoids injury to others by avoiding all evil actions and the evil thoughts that produce them. The Bodhisattvas add to this the practice of actively helping beings. As we have said, their discipline comprises the 3 facets of avoiding evil, embracing virtue, and bringing benefit to others. Moreover, in all 7 Pratimoksha disciplines, there are 7 things to be abandoned: the 3 negativities of the body and the 4 of speech. On this level, therefore, stress is laid on physical and verbal actions. By contrast, bodhisattvas strive to abandon all 10 negative actions. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that those practicing the pratimoksha don't practice the last 3 as well, but the emphasis in the case of the bodhisattva is much more on the subtle aspects of the mind, and we'll then look more particularly on that here in the following. Other differences distinguish them. For, according to the Pratimoksha, rules should not be broken, even for the sake of others. But if the 7 evil deeds of speech and body are for others' good, the bodhisattvas are permitted them, provided that on threefold scrutiny, they know their actions to be or will be for the benefit of beings, and will further and not lessen their own store of merit. This we find depicted in the tale of Goodheart and Black Spearman, and of Tararamana, the Brahmin's son. Although they seem like sins, their acts were virtuous. But since the strength of action and result derives from the intention, the 3 non-virtues of the mind can never be allowed. So that's actually where the bodhisattva path becomes incredibly disciplined, interesting, because it actually extends beyond just what we do, and really understand that what really drives the value of any action is the intention behind. So here then we'll look more. Kangyur Rinpoche comments then, in the context of actions to be abandoned, there is a further distinction separating the pratimoksha from the bodhisattva vows. Having in mind self-interested persons who have taken the vows and who apprehend phenomena as truly existent, the Buddha did not allow, in a pratimoksha context, the 7 aforesaid negative actions of body and speech to be perpetrated, even in situations in which others might benefit. Okay, so this is implicit for particular individuals who are very concerned about external action and who have a very, you could say, rigid view, a very consolidated belief in the solidity of phenomena, and who don't really understand how phenomena essentially are, you could say, constructed by the mind. And that's where then, when there is this kind of, you could say, mind that still holds on to these views, then for such a person, then behavior is everything. And that's where it doesn't matter what matters less what the attitude is. You really have to behave according to the rules. You know, we very often have sort of a little bit of a sort of, sometimes we'll say things, well, rules are made to be broken. And we have this sort of slightly cool anarchist view that, you know, just be intelligent and then you don't have to abide too much by the rules. And that to some extent applies, but there are also cases in which we really do, in some contexts, you really need to abide by the rules. And this, of course, often we see in terms of also when we're new in a new situation, then we need to be quite keen on what's protocol and exactly what do you do and so on. So this is sort of something that the distinction is something that's quite familiar to most of us. The precepts as formulated are not to be transgressed. So that's where there's some very strict rules for the pratimoksha that are to be adhered to. Bodhisattvas, however, are permitted to disregard them if this would be of benefit to others. In this situation, an examination must be made to see whether 3 conditions are present. Okay, so we can abandon the rules, the strict rules about behavior, physical behavior, verbal behavior, when there's 3 conditions that then prevail. And that's where then Kangyur Rinpoche continues. First, the bodhisattva must know that a given negative action, one of the 7, physical or verbal, so this can be, for example, rough speech, you know, or maybe stealing. Okay, now we generally, for example, would think Robin Hood was a nice guy because he would steal from the rich and give to the poor. Well, if you did this as a bodhisattva, then that would actually be, there would be a lot of virtue in stealing. And if if you practice rough speech, like, you know, I'd sort of yell somebody, watch out for that car, or you might sort of be a person with great insight that would know in a particular context, then rough speech is simply needed. Anyway, so if that is of direct benefit for others, then yes, then it's okay. It benefits others. And second, that it will be so in the future, that this is something that's benefiting now and that it'll benefit them also from here onwards. Finally, the bodhisattva must be sure that such an action will not obstruct the accumulation, but will rather augment it. So, of course, if one uses rough speech with compassion, but then it's something that will turn say you represent the Dharma and you practice rough speech. Well, that might actually result in that people might get turned off the Dharma. So that's where it would be something that would get in the way of somebody accumulating the merit. And that's, of course, why somebody who has a role in the Dharma needs to have, you could say, skillful means in terms of how they behave. So that's where it has to be so that it doesn't create obstacles for the other person accumulating merit in the future. These 3 conditions being present, the bodhisattva is allowed to act in an apparently negative way. This is illustrated in the story of Captain Goodhart, who killed Black Spearman in order to protect him from the full ripening of his actions and thereby perfected the accumulation of merit of 80,000 kalpas. So some of you would be familiar with this story from Words of My Perfect Teacher. There was a ship with merchants, and they were sailing to Indonesia to do their business. And on board there was a potential assassin. Now, the captain of the boat, known as Captain Goodhart, he was aware of this chap, who was then referred to as Black Spearman. And the captain knew that he intended to wipe out all of the merchants. And before he could get around to Captain Goodhart, then his thinking was that if this man succeeded in killing all these individuals, he would suffer immensely for countless lifetimes. So interesting, his compassion was about this man and essentially making sure that this man wouldn't go through all the suffering. This is very interesting because you might think, oh, he had compassion for all the merchants, which of course he had as well. But the main actually object of his compassion was the black spearman who would perpetuate and create so much negativity for himself. So that's why you say this accumulated merit, infinite merit, because of course then all of a sudden Captain Goodcart would have done something that was by convention incredibly bad. But he did so with this insight. So let's see if this, there you have it. It's mentioned in Words of My Perfect Teacher, yeah. Then there was Tararamana, the son of the Brahmin, who practiced chastity in the forest for 42,000 years. So he was very committed to his practice. One day he went to a village to beg for alms and was seen by the daughter of a merchant who fell violently in love with him. She became so infatuated that she was ready to kill herself. In order to prevent this, the ascetic relinquished the vow of chastity and in this way accumulated the merit of 80,000 kalpas. So this is also a beautiful example of somebody who was willing to, you know, that's a long time that you've been practicing. This is, we have to have a little bit of openness with regards to you could say the hyperbole implicit in this, but it's simply just the relinquishing of this, where very often somebody could be seen as being addicted to their particular discipline and rigid around it. That's actually one of the obstacles on the path, is what we call holding discipline as, how do you say, being rigid around one's discipline. Tulshuk chojin, holding one's discipline as ultimate, sort of superior. So that sort of genuinely caring more for the others, that he then married this woman. So that again is seen as something that was accumulated merit of 80,000 kalpas. But here again, we need to get clear. This is about, both these cases is about the unseen dimension of what can't be, it's unseen dimension. And so we can't look at the behavior. The first one, he was clearly a murderer. Captain Goodhart was a murderer. The second was simply just a fallen monk, if we look at it from the outside, just in terms of behavior. But nevertheless, because of the intention behind, then this becomes virtue. So that's where we can see the Mahayana perspective is so much greater. So that's where, and then Kangyur Rinpoche continues, other stories can be found that give similar examples of stealing and so forth. In the case of the 4 negative actions of speech, if those actions are truly meaningful, the Bodhisattva is allowed to perform them. So that is rough speech, divisive speech, lying, and gossiping. Yeah. This actually we can see sometimes with our teacher. They're willing to sit around and gossip with us, simply just because it makes us feel good, and we can we connect with the teacher through that. So that's where Bodhisattvas then might say, oh, that teacher, he likes to sit around and gossip, but it's really just out of kindness and sort of knowing that the students they sort of open up in that kind of relaxed situation. So if these actions are truly meaningful, the Bodhisattva is allowed to perform them. They may have the appearances of false. Yeah, somebody might come along and say, oh, so-and-so is not a spiritual practitioner because they behave in this way, they do these things, or they say these things. But actually, that's where we actually don't know, and we should be willing to be humble. And actually, that's where we very often say, you know, you don't know who is the Bodhisattva. But Kangyur Rinpoche then writes, however, given that it is the intention that creates the powerful effect of an action, it stands to reason that the 3 negative actions of mind are not permitted to anyone under any circumstances. And that's where what really rules the value of an action is the intention behind. So that's where, if the intention is covetousness, wanting something, or anger, you know, hatred, or ignorance, wrong view, not understanding the nature of reality, not understanding what usually we define wrong view as not understanding cause and effect, not understanding the reality of past and future lives, and not understanding the potential for perfect enlightenment. If we don't have these, then we basically have what's called wrong view, and that's, of all the 10, that's the worst. But the other two also, essentially greed and hatred, which are mental states. There's never a time where any of these three then are permitted. Well, permitted in the sense that they're always going to be something that damages anybody. It doesn't matter if they're bodhisattvas or not. Let's see here. So Yenten Gyatso, he then says, how is it that it is sometimes taught, nevertheless, that aside from wrong views, the other two negative acts of mind are occasionally permitted? Okay, now this is where then you could say anger and greed then are questions. Are they permitted? So he says, if the motive is analyzed in detail, one can see that it is possible to covet the wealth of a person of low merit in order to make offering on that person's behalf, right? So this is, okay, so this is then where somebody might say, okay, you don't have a lot, but maybe you should give this to me. And, I come to think of, there's a wonderful story about the 16th Karmapa. He came to a hill one time, up on a hilltop, where the people had a tremendous problem with not having water. They didn't have any spring, or they didn't have any kind of, they had to go very far to get water. So water was a big issue up on this sort of ridge or hilltop. And then His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, he arrived there. And he said, I think I'd like a bath. And so these villagers, they all brought the water, heated the water. And so His Holiness the Karmapa could have a bath in this place. Nice big tub full of warm water. And after that, he poured it out. It was poured out. And on that location, a spring sprang up, simply on the basis of enabling, you could say, the right tendril or the right causes and conditions. Then this amazing phenomenon happened. Of course, you need to be a devotee of in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and of His Holiness the Karmapa to lend credence to this. But there are many stories like that. And okay, and then also Yenten Gyatso says, or again, one might wish to reduce the power and influence of someone who is destroying the teachings and injuring others. So that's, again, where one might sort of act in what looks like anger. Mental actions such as these do not have the complete characteristics of a negativity. They are therefore admissible. However, it is never taught that truly negative actions of the mind are permissible. So that's where you can say, when it comes to these last three, it's subtle, but truly negative actions, of course, of hatred and greed, entirely based on, you could say, self-centered interest, is of course not permissible. So then 37. It has been taught that though this be the case, for those, though they hold the bodhisattva vows, pursue their own advantage and their happiness, avoiding all the actions hard to do and failing to achieve the benefit of others, the dispensation just described is but the cause of downfall. So that's where you don't want this to become sort of a sad excuse. He says, therefore, within the context of the Mahayana, the 7 negative actions of body and speech are, under certain circumstances, permitted. It is said in the teaching that, however, that in the case of someone new to the bodhisattva commitment, who is still involved in his or her own concerns and desire for happiness, and who gives up the precepts because they're difficult to keep, and not through any intention to direct or indirect benefit to others, the perpetration of such actions is simply a downfall. So that's where then acting, in ways that either negative actions with body or with speech, where it is permitted for bodhisattvas who really have genuine caring for others. If it's just then, if you you could say you steal in order to benefit others, bring benefit to others, or whatever it might be. If it's then really just that you're stealing for your own benefit and you then say, well, I'm practicing the bodhisattva path, then it really just becomes a lame excuse. So that's where this is the case where beginning bodhisattvas, they should be careful not to abuse this kind of this what's being said here in terms of how the motivation is more important. Yeah, so that's when it just becomes that becomes simply a downfall. Then no matter if you're a bodhisattva or whatever, then you can say whatever you want. But if you really are doing it just for your own sake, then it is, of course, a downfall. So then avoiding negativity. Yeah. Discipline of avoiding negative actions, yeah. And then first there's difference between the vow of the Hinayana and Mahayana. So we're still within the discipline of avoiding negative actions. And then avoiding negativity according to the Mahayana. So we're distinguishing between the Hinayana and Mahayana. We've done that. And then specifically then avoiding negativity according to the Mahayana. So Jigme Lingpa writes, bodhisattvas who are starting on their path should mainly bring an increase to their qualities of mind. At the outset, while first on the three disciplines, while the first of the three disciplines, to keep themselves from evil, is as yet impure, to take the other two as principle will entail many obstacles. So that's where the first is to avoid evil. Then to embrace positive actions and benefit others, that has really to be founded on a solid foundation of first avoiding evil, negative actions, neurotic actions, if you like. So then it says, thus, for the beginner on the bodhisattva path, the first task is to discipline the mind. The most important thing is to train oneself in such a way that the qualities like renunciation and faith constantly increase. Beginners must train to bring their mind under control, progressing steadily day by day and month by month. Indeed, if at the outset, when the mind has not yet been purified by the discipline of avoiding negative behavior, too much emphasis is placed on the other two aspects of the bodhisattva discipline, namely undertaking positive actions and bringing benefit to others, many hindrances will occur that impede progress in the three trainings, the path to Buddhahood. So that's where initially it's just good to stop putting an end to one's bad habits. That shouldn't be that hard to do. But unless one does that, then also trying to be too good and benefit others might be a little bit difficult. And usually for the beginner, it's pretty clear what is it actually that is one's, what are the destructive patterns. So that's what one first needs to put an end to. 39, best are bodhisattvas who go forth to homelessness, as the sutra ornament declares. And yet, it is not clearly said that such a discipline belonging to the bodhisattva level should always be embraced through an authentic pratimoksha ritual. For as with Indra Bodhi, the intention is supreme for those with previous training and great strength of mind. So that's where going forth to homelessness, that actually means ordination, to become a monastic. And that's always in the you could say, incredible pragmatism of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. There's always such an emphasis on the value of the pratimoksha vows, of the monastics. And that's something that has yet to take root within the modern world. But I remember Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche would always say, the monastics are the foundation of the Dharma. So that, of course, is an important point. But then again, yes, there are certainly bodhisattvas who are not necessarily monastics. And we even have someone like King Indrabodhi, who wished to practice the path, but was unable to give up his situation as a king. So here Kangyur Rinpoche comments, he says, a bodhisattva who has embraced the monastic life is superior to a bodhisattva who is a householder. Well, let's just see what there is to be said about that. It says here, ordination into the monastic life of homelessness is praised as the best condition for progress toward enlightenment, and it remains so until the supreme ground of realization is attained. Thus, monastic ordination is the best situation for beginners whose principal training is in the discipline of avoiding negativities. Wearing the robes will remind them to observe the discipline, and they will be easily recognized by both gods and humans as a suitable object of offering. In this way, they will receive sustenance without needing to involve themselves in wearisome activities and will not be defiled by the need to involve themselves in unethical situations. Thus, free from distractions and a troubled conscience, they will have the principal living conditions for the development of concentration. The holder of the Bodhisattva vow, who at the same time has the Pratimoksha vows, is said to observe the Pratimoksha of the Bodhisattvas. So that's where also what is involved in the Pratimoksha lifestyle, in addition to having the conditions for practice, is actually also that enables others to identify them. And particularly in Buddhist cultures, then there's the practice of what we call leveling the merit. And that's where when someone sees somebody who is ordained, then they have the opportunity to make offerings to them. And making offerings to those who are on the path then provides the condition for the householder who is making offerings to have some part in the great merit that these practitioners that they are accumulating. And that's, so then we would say those who are bodhisattvas, who also have the monastic vow, are then the pratimoksha of the bodhisattvas. And this, by the way, also applies to the tantrikas, where we also would say to have the foundation of the pratimoksha vows, and on top of that, the bodhisattva vows, and on top of that, the samaya of the Vajrayana yogi, is then what we would call a threefold Vajra holder, Sumden Dorjit Zimba, the threefold Vajra Acharya, or someone who is holding the perfect discipline. So then Kangyur Rinpoche quotes the Sutra Alamkara, where it says, bodhisattvas who embrace monastic life are boundless in the qualities they have. Compared with layfolk who uphold the vow of bodhicitta, the ordained are declared to be supreme. The Mahayana Sutras do not say, however, that all bodhisattvas must follow a discipline based exclusively on the pratimoksha ritual. For it is said that an extraordinary bodhisattva discipline is also open to gods, nagas, and other non-human beings. So we can see in the Mahayana Sutras very often those attending include also non-humans, gods, and nagas. Kangyur Rinpoche then continues and says, in the case of people who have previously trained in the two accumulations and have a powerfully determined mind, able to assimilate the profound and vast teachings, it does not matter whether they are ordained or layfolk. The most important factor is intention. This is illustrated by the story of King Indrabodhi, the king of Udayana, who took all three vows in a single instant, simply by receiving an empowerment. So this is in the Guhya Samaj Tantra. There's the story of this king who invited the Buddha, and like I was just saying before, actually received this, became what we call someone who received the three levels of Pratimoksha Bodhisattva and the Vajrayana vows. So we have the story here. So it says, this is not Yim Gyatso, I'm not sure who DS is, but anyway. So it says, once upon a time, Indrabodhi, the king of Udayana, caught sight of some red objects flying in the sky. They were too far away for him to see what they were. What are those strange birds? He asked. The courtiers informed him that they were Shravakas, the followers of the Buddha. Thereupon the king conceived the desire to see the Buddha and prayed to him. And sure enough, the Buddha miraculously appeared in the company of 500 arhats. Indrabodhi paid homage to him and asked him to teach him the path to enlightenment. The Buddha said that the king should go forth into homelessness and embrace the life of a monk, practicing the 3 trainings. But to this, Indrabodhi replied, O Gautama, I do not want liberation if it means giving up all that is a delight to my senses. Indeed, I would prefer to be a fox in the pleasant garden of the world. In that very instant, the retinue of Shravakas vanished, and a voice was heard from the sky, proclaiming that they had been but the miraculous display of the Bodhisattvas. The Buddha then opened the wisdom mandala of the Guhya Samaj Tantra, and in that very instant, the king attained Buddhahood, the union of Dharmakaya and Rupakaya. So I'm not sure where this is from, I should look it up. But anyway, this is a famous story about, and this is one of the stories about, you could say, where the occasions where the Buddha taught the Vajrayana. So what we're really saying here is that the king already had all the merit, and the Buddha could see that this king had the potential for fully understanding the nature of wisdom. And so when we say he opened the wisdom mandala of the Guhya Samaj Tantra, it basically means that he introduced the king to his own abiding Buddha nature, his innate wisdom, uncorrupted by any karmic or any kind of obscuration, any kind of, karmic or any of the 3 kinds of obscurations, cognitive obscurations and emotional obscuration, karmic obscuration, and so on. That's where the king discovered this innate disposition of wisdom that was completely untainted in any way. And that's where, on that very instant, then he attained complete awakening of the Dharmakaya and Rupakaya, then the natural disposition of awakening, which is to manifest for others. So we say enlightenment comes with these 2 kayas, the kaya of wisdom, Dharmakaya, and the kaya of, or the body of compassion, the Rupakaya. So, let's see. I think we can finish here. Let's see. It says, so are there any questions in regard to what we've been looking at here? Does it make perfect sense? Yeah, it's all right. No objections? That's good.
In the chat, a couple of questions.
Reliable, you can say, Veronica, go ahead.
No, I said in the chat box, a couple of reflections and
For
questions.
some reason I can't hear you. And you're not muted. I wonder if there's something wrong with my system.
Can you hear now? No?
Oh dear. Computers. Let me see. No. That's great. Here I am encouraging. Questions and I can't hear.
Can you hear me, Jakob? Spell.
Okay, sorry about that, Veronica. For some reason, my technology here is doing something. Do you think you could write it in the chat? Yeah. Or else, I mean, given that obviously I can't hear, if you guys could, if you have a question, send it to me in an email. You know, I mean, you can type it into the. How bizarre is that?
Jakob, can you hear now? No, still not. Can anybody else hear?
I can hear you.
Yes,
Okay, I can hear you
me
too.
too, yeah.
Apparently,
Okay, there's
I
some
don't know if he
questions
can
in the
even
chat.
see the
Okay.
questions in the chat
Good.
box.
But the action, whether good or bad, depends on results. Is it not like that? No. That's where, this is what we normally would say, you know, is it good or bad? No, it actually depends on our intention, the intention behind this. This we know from real life. Sometimes we have to do things that from the outside might look as if it's bad behavior, but if the intention is good, you know, the police will tell you can't park here. And, that might be annoying to us. And then we might see that's a negative action, but it really just is for you could say practical purposes. And also if parents, for example, they are tough on their children, they might do so out of love. They might say, no, you can't stay up until 5 in the morning. And the children will then find that the parents are being mean, but actually it's really just out of caring. Let's see here. Four special features of the Bodhisattva might be 3 out of 10, plus 1 benefiting others. Possibly, yeah. 3 out of the 10 and 1 benefiting others. That's maybe, yeah. I'm open to that. That's possible, yeah. But that seems is true because that seems to be what was the theme occurring, yeah. So yes. Then concerning 3 conditions for transgressing certain rules, how can third be independent from the 2 first? If an action brings benefit to others now and in the future, will it not automatically lead to an increase of merit condition for increased condition for number 3? Can you give an example where the first 2 conditions are met but not the third? Okay, Veronica, I'm gonna have to just I'm gonna have to think about that. Okay, I'm just gonna cut and paste that and keep it. Yeah, so I'll answer that next time. I'll remember that and get back to it next time. That's a good question. When it's over, trying to see if there's an update for Zoom. Okay, I'll have a look at that. I can hear. Yeah, it's me that can't hear for some reason. I don't know. So let's see here. How can one see intention of others? Well, that's the thing. That's what we can't, and that's where we would never. We very often say we never know who is a bodhisattva. And that's where we'd be very reluctant to actually judge others. So that's where we would say, if you have omniscience or if you have a great clairvoyance or whatever, yes, you could possibly see the intention of others. But for most of us, we can't. So that's where it's very difficult for us to judge what is the intentions of others. And also hence we need to be very careful with regards to assuming that we know the intention of others. The monastic bodhisattva being considered superior to the layperson bodhisattva Is that simply due to the monastic being an environment that is more conducive to practicing the path? Well, actually, refer to Yenten Gyatso's the footnote there, which is really that there's a number of things that are conducive. So for the person, him or herself, yes, that's where the environment is more conducive. Like it says, it furthers the capacity for concentration and also the general practice of the path. But it's also it's not just the environment in terms that you're in, but it's also the environment that you're out of. You know, you're out of the sort of the very often less inspiring circumstances and very distracting circumstances of a layperson's life. So that's where it's superior in that regard. And also like he was mentioning with regards to sustenance, that it's very often being in that environment, you don't have to look after sustenance. You become an object of offering for others that then also look after you. Like I was saying, in terms of leveling the merit. Okay, I guess that's it. So yeah, I looked into someone who says, yes, thank you. Tusind tak. If you have been listening to something on earphones, they might still be connected and therefore you cannot hear. I just checked if that was the case, but that also doesn't seem to. Oh well, anyway. Seems that there's always there's been a few techie issues here as of late, but thank you for your patience. Okay, I think we'll conclude here. Let's see.
Thank you,
From
Jakob.
our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So, thank you very much.